Hi guys, welcome back to Set Speaks. In today's video, I will be giving my review and thoughts on Netflix's Shadow and Bone. This series has basically been my latest hyperfixation. I haven't been a longtime fan of the books, which I believe were published in the 2010s. I actually only started reading the books this past April, shortly before the show premiered, because every time there was an announcement regarding the show, the show would trend on Tumblr, and I got curious, so I decided to check it out. Plus, someone had also referred the Six of Crows duology to me, but I never got around to reading them until then. And I honestly can say that these two are the best books I've ever read. The entire Grishaverse is very close to my heart now because they're the books that got me out of the reading slump that I've been in for the past year and a half. And I had high expectations for the show after finding out that the author of these books, Lee Bardugo, was also an executive producer for the show. I have many thoughts about the show, so this video will be in two parts. The first part, I will be giving my overall review of the show, talking about what I liked and what I didn't like. And the second part will be focusing more on the crows and their portrayal as well as their dynamic in depth. So let's start off with my overall review of the show. As a bookworm, I've always preferred the book over the screen adaptation because of the following reasons. A lot of book-to-screen adaptations tend to disappoint me because they have failed to capture the spirit of the story, they have butchered the characters badly, they stray too far from the plot, or the casting was just not that great. And there's two book series that I've loved whose adaptations weren't great. And I'm not going to name names, but let's just say one of them was a movie and the other one was a show. But Shadow and Bone was completely different. It was an amazing adaptation because it captured the spirit of the story while improving upon the weaknesses of the books, particularly the Shadow and Bone trilogy. The thing about the trilogy that made it good but not great was that it was told completely from Alina's perspective. And while I understand that the books were written at a time where it was very common for young adult novels to be told from a first-person perspective, it did mean that the reader was very much restricted to the events that happened to Alina, and we only have access to her thoughts and perceptions of other characters. Because this is a show and there's an ensemble cast of at least 6 main characters, the show jumps back and forth primarily between Alina and the Crow's perspective in the first episodes. Then we also get introduced to Mal's perspective while he hunts the stag for Alina. And we even get General Kerrigan / the Darkling's perspective in later episodes. So as viewers, we're able to have more range of knowledge and understanding of the characters, and we're not just reliant on a single character's perception of the other characters, which I think is one of the things that made the show a bit better than the books in that sense. But on that same note, I can understand how people who have never read the books would be confused because there are a lot of characters that were introduced and also because of the show's fast pacing. I know that the show was operating within a certain budget, so there's only a limited number of episodes that they can work with, and as such, they can only fit in so many things and go through them as quickly as possible based on this limited episode count. And speaking as someone who has read the books, I had gone into the show with the knowledge regarding the lore, world building, and politics, so I didn't need any explanation for what a Grisha was, what the Grisha orders were, and I knew the countries in the fictional universe, etc. But I can understand and see how someone who has never read the books would be confused because there is a lot of world building, lore, and politics involved, and the show is trying to avoid info dumping. The show does make a valiant effort at explaining the way Grisha powers work and its limitations. It also explains in the first episode that Ravka was at war with Fjerda because of their hatred and practices of hunting and killing Grisha, but it doesn't explain why the Shuhan were considered one of Ravka's enemies, and why anyone who looks like their Shu would be treated with distrust. So I think that's why some people online have mentioned that they found the racism scenes with Alina to be unnecessary or out of place. So I think that if the show had even quickly explained that the Shuhan were also, they also excluded Grisha and actually experimented on them, then it would allow for show-only viewers to understand why Alina is treated this way based on her half-Shu heritage. Another thing that I greatly loved about the show was the use of the whip pan transition. I actually didn't know what it was called when I saw it used for the first time on the show. I was just like, oh my gosh, look at the way that camera like swivels like into like the next scene. Like that is so cool. And I didn't know the term was whip pan transition until I read an interview that one of the show's directors did. And, they actually named the transition. So I was able to look it up and I was like, oh, okay, so that's what it's called and that's how it's used. I love that this transition technique was used heavily in episode 1 and episode 5. So this transition technique was commonly used when the crows were on the screen, and I think it's actually pretty cool because there's another show that I watch called Leverage, which is also about criminals and heists, and they also use this transition technique frequently. And I was very interested in this technique, so I actually looked it up, and I found out that they were commonly used in 70s martial arts movies, but I guess it also really works for like heist storylines and criminal characters. Another technical aspect of the show that I really loved was the use of the tracking shot in episode 5.
I notice a certain West Ravkan general is conspicuously absent.
It's such a great technique to not only establish which of the Grisha were at the winter fete, but the way the camera moves and pans really makes it seem like the viewer is in that scene, in that moment, and the camera is acting as the viewer's eyes. It's not a super duper significant thing, but I thought it was pretty cool, especially like with how the camera like moved and went on to linger onto the Novi Zem ambassadors and their conversation regarding Zlatan and West Ravka. So those were the technical aspects that I loved. What I didn't like was one thing and one thing only: the lighting, particularly in the Crow Club in episode 1 and the Fold in episode 8. I know it's all part of like the aesthetic, and it's used, like this lighting was used to emphasize that the Crow Club was not in a good part of Ketterdam, but I had to turn my laptop's brightness like all the way up just to clearly see what's going on screen. And it was the same situation with the Fold in like the Fold fight in the final episode. Like, again, I know the Fold is like meant to be like this dark, scary place, but Netflix, please don't be afraid to like use a little bit more light because I cannot see what is going on screen. But moving on from the technical aspects, I'd like to mention some of the changes that was made by the show, particularly in regards to the Darkling's character. So first, I just want to say that Ben Barnes did an amazing job. Like, he managed to make the Darkling appear intimidating and imposing, but he's able to act with his eyes, so you could see the vulnerability in them, especially in episode 4. I didn't really like the choice to not only reveal his name to Alina by the 4th episode, but also like the revelation of his connection to Morozova by the 7th episode. The name thing was such a big deal in the books because he had gone by so many names over the years, and him giving his birth name to Alina, a name he hadn't been called in like centuries, was almost a kind of trust in a way. Yet in the show he gives his name like super casually to her, and I know it's probably like a manipulation tactic that he's using, but you could have literally done anything else except for like give his like name, but okay, whatever. And his connection to Morozova was not really something, again, book readers discovered until the 3rd book. So it kind of gives away the mystery regarding his obsession with Morozova's amplifiers. The show also did a really good job of utilizing lines from the book that were spoken by the characters.
No, it's not natural for someone to be as stupid as he is tall, and yet... Oh, there you stand.
Crows don't just remember the faces of people who wronged them. They also remember those who are kind. They tell each other who to look after and who to watch out for.
Fine. Make me your villain.
If I'm meant to die today, and either of you two survive, make sure I have an open casket.
No one's dying today. No mourners.
No funerals.
It didn't feel forced into the scene, and it flowed smoothly with like the characters' dialogue. And I remember that every time I heard like a line from the book, I would go, like, I just reacted like that because I love that they're acknowledging the original source material. And, you know, like, yes, it is an adaptation, and sometimes you cannot include lines from the book, but they did it in a way that it just works. I just love it. I could go on like about the book lines like all day. They also dropped little hints about Jesper and Kaz's backstory in the show, and these hints are not really something you'd pick up on unless you've read the books. I won't exactly say what's up with Jesper, because the way I found out through the books made me scream because I didn't see it coming at all. But it also made sense, which I think is what the show is going for, so that when this revelation comes, people can look back at the hints and understand how it all came together. Now, Kaz's backstory is a little more, I wouldn't say obvious, but explicit, because it relied on dialogue and Freddie Carter's acting. Like, you can tell from the way he says Pekka Rollins' name in episode 2 that there's definitely some history there. Hint, hint. And even in the way he looks at him, Freddie did an amazing job in the scene, and it really makes you wonder what happened between him and Rollins if you haven't read the books. My final favorite part of the adaptation, the crows. So anyone who's read the books would know that the crows were not part of the original trilogy, and they didn't even make an appearance in the first 3 books because their story doesn't take place until I think 2 to 3 years after the events of the final book. And I thought that including them was a really smart choice. And I'm not just saying that because I love them, but because everyone who has read the books is a massive fan of the crows. I mean, who doesn't love a group of morally ambiguous criminals who decided, hey, let's kidnap a supposedly mythic being and, you know, like, let's get paid 1 million Kruger for it. They just want their money, and I can respect that.
I want my money.
Like, yes, they are criminals, but they have some morals. Or at least Inej does. I will definitely go more in depth about the crows and their portrayal in the second part of the video. But I really do think that including them in the show was a great idea, and I don't think that the improvements the show made upon the book would have been possible without the inclusion of the most beloved characters in the Grishaverse. My overall thoughts on the show as an adaptation is this. It's not perfect, but it is a pretty darn good adaptation. While it is based off the books, the show adaptation is a completely different medium. And the difference in medium, because of the difference in medium, and because they're also trying to reach an audience that hasn't read the books, they have to make some changes. And some things that might have worked well in the books, like inner monologue and thoughts, they don't translate too well onto screen, so they have to rely on acting choices. But despite the change in medium, Shadow and Bone still manages to capture the essence of the show and to bring these characters to life, which is what makes it a good adaptation. Now, in the second part, I will be talking about the crows and their dynamic. I personally thought that the show did pretty well in capturing their characters and bringing them to life. Some people would disagree with me. The main argument between book fans was that the crows were not the brilliant criminal masterminds we met in Six of Crows, and also the idea that Kaz in the show is too soft and not ruthless enough. I cannot stress this enough. The showrunners and even the actors have mentioned time and time again in interviews that the Crows storyline in the show acts as a prequel to their storyline in Six of Crows, which means that they're not going to be at the level that they're at yet. Did they completely fail in kidnapping Alina like they were hired to? Yes, Does that make them dumb? No. You see them pull off a heist in the archives. They managed to get into the little palace and went by undetected for the most part, until that Inferni got suspicious. Heck, Kaz realized that Arkin was working with Zlatan after seeing them together once in episode 3. He also was the one who realized that they were using Marie as a double for Alina after seeing her in the fitting room with the two Keftas. Don't forget that each of them managed to come up against Agrisha and they all got away.
I really should have shot you in the head.
Yeah.
So no, the crows weren't dumbed down in the slightest, and this was a pretty good starting point for them because it shows that they are intelligent and capable, but there's still room for growth. In regards to Kaz not being ruthless enough, I would like to point out that the crows were no longer in Ketterdam, which was where Kaz's reputation as the ruthless dirty hands was important and is the reason why he is feared. But there's no need for that ruthlessness in Ravka, where no one knows him and it's not his home turf. But we do get to see glimpses of his ruthlessness, particularly in his fight against the Inferni.
Unlike a spider, I only need one good leg. However, you look like you need both hands.
And Kaz isn't someone who is ruthless without a reason. In this case, he is ruthless because this Inferni is trying to kill him, and he incapacitated him in the way he knew best, which was to crush the Inferni's hand. So the crows were supposed to kidnap Alina for 1,000,000 Kruga, but they don't exactly succeed. I did still think that it was hilarious that Kaz and Inej were like trying to kidnap Alina and they thought they lost her because the Darkling intercepted them. Then Jesper was just hooking up with a stable hand and didn't do anything but get the horses and the carriage. And he watches Alina climb into the back of like their carriage. Like Jesper's reaction to the whole thing and him teasing Cass about Alina's whereabouts was just too funny. And this was one of my favorite scenes in the entire show. But going back to the Crows' portrayal, I really liked where the show went with them because you get to see more of their dynamic. There's more Jesper and Inej interactions and you can tell that they really care for each other. Jesper and Kaz also had a pretty good dynamic despite Kaz technically being his boss. And my favorite was getting to see Kaz and Inej's dynamic play out on screen. Freddie Carter and Amita Suman did such amazing jobs bringing their characters to life and they just have so much chemistry. Like that one scene in episode 4 where Inej is taking off her knives and handing them to Kaz. That is some serious and intense eye contact.
Oh, chills. Literal chills.
And we can't forget that iconic church scene. While in the book, Inej has already killed, we learned in the show that by the second episode that she has yet to kill someone, and that's why Kaz doesn't really trust her as much. But then we get to episode 5, and she doesn't even hesitate to throw the knife at the Inferni's head to save Kaz's life. Amita did a wonderful job showing Inej's horror and shock at realizing what she did. And Freddie as Kaz also did an amazing job because he showed like the struggle that he wanted to comfort Inej, but he can't touch her because of his touch phobia. So he settles for trying to justify the kill she made because she saved his life.
Look at me. You saved my life. Now get your segment, let's go.
And even though he couldn't touch her, he bumped/brushed his shoulder against her, and that was just the closest that he could get to comforting her physically. And I thought that was just really beautifully done. And then we get to the next episode. In episode 6, Inej makes a conscious decision to kill someone, and it's not done in the heat of the moment like it was in the previous episode.
In that case, I'll take my knife back.
She deliberately chose to pull out her knife and let the Inferni woman bleed out after the woman called her trash, but also threatened to hunt down the people that she cares for. Inej is one of my favorite characters because she has gone through so much, yet she still is very much compassionate and maintains her faith. You know, like she refuses to compromise her faith, and that had been like the point of contention between her and Kaz in episode 6. She refuses to betray her faith for him. And while Kaz himself is stubborn, he realizes that not only is Inej headstrong and unwavering, but he admits in the final episode that he needs her, which is why he agreed to let Alina go and keep quiet about her whereabouts. I feel so strongly about Kaz and Inej's relationship, which is why I have so much to say. And while Jesper, Kaz, and Inej are the original crows, Nina and Matthias would also become part of that group, and so they get an honorary mention in this part of the video. I know a lot of people online who either completely loved Matthias and Nina's scenes together or completely hated them. And while their scenes do feel a little out of place in the overall narrative, it is a pretty important one. So their story is like a progression of enemies to reluctant allies to possible lovers and then back to enemies again before becoming lovers again. When we meet them in the book, Matthias had already been in Hellgate, which is like this prison place, and he's been there for over a year, and he holds a grudge against Nina because of her false accusations, and he doesn't know that she did it to save his life. And the book told their backstory through flashbacks, while the show has it played out in real time, and they also did it like word for word from the books. And I think that this was a smart idea because it would mean that there would be less flashbacks to use in future seasons, because the viewers have already seen and, you know, they already know what goes down between Nina and Matthias. And also, like, at the end of the season, having her be on the same boat, like, with the original crows and overhearing that they need a heart render sets her induction to the crows perfectly. And like in the book, she was already a crow, but I like the idea of seeing how she became a crow and seeing her interactions with the rest of the group play out on screen. The first season does a wonderful job of showing us more interactions and dynamics between the different crows, and I absolutely loved the way that they were portrayed. I'm super excited and hopeful that we would meet the final crow in season 2, Wylan Van Eck, who is their demolitions expert and also Jesper's love interest. I also really want to see Nina and Inej's friendship on screen, because their friendship was one of the most beautifully written ones that I've encountered, and I really hope that we get these two scenes from the book in the upcoming season. Kaz leaned back. What's the easiest way to steal a man's wallet? Knife to the throat, asked Inej. Gun to the back, said Jesper. Poison in his cup, suggested Nina. You're all horrible, said Matthias. And the next one. Jesper knocked his head against the hull and cast his eyes heavenward. Fine, but if Pekka Rollins kills us all, I'm going to get Wylan's ghost to teach my ghost how to play the flute just so I can annoy the hell out of your ghost. Brecker's lips quirked. I'll just hire Matthias's ghost to kick your ghost's ass. My ghost won't associate with your ghost, Matthias said primly, and then wondered if the sea air was rotting his brain. I hope you guys can now understand why I love the crows so much and why I'm especially excited to see more of them in the show's upcoming season. Okay, and that is a wrap on my review on Netflix's Shadow and Bone, as well as my thoughts on the crows, their portrayal, and their dynamic. Tune in next week for my video on The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Thank you guys so much for watching my video, and please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.